this is our effort to try to make the issue of taxes come alive, that it's not for some just let's send our money to the state capital and not care what's done with it, but it's rather we need things from state government. Here's why we need these things, and then here's why we need the revenues and a fair system of revenue to support these very important investments that state government can make to benefit people's lives.
Now people ask, what could be more boring than tax policy? It turns out some of us find it interesting because it's the key to any government action. If you care about the programs government runs, you ultimately have to care about how government raises the money to do it.
State and local governments take about 10% of our income in North Carolina. And if somebody's taking 10% of the income out of my pocket, I think we should have somebody outside keeping an eye on what's going on, communicating this so that people can understand where their money is going from, who it comes from, why is it that way, and how should it change for the better.
The story started when I came to the Ford Foundation with a small number of projects that I thought were likely to be worth exploring. And one of them was a project to do for the states what the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in Washington had done for the nation, which was to provide excellent, reliable analysis of budgets and taxes. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities had been started in the early 80s, and by the time I got to the Ford Foundation in 1991, was one of the premier organizations in Washington that was relied on to explain to people what was going on in the national budget, particularly with respect to the implications for poor people and other vulnerable populations, so that we could actually have good conversations about what the implications were of different policy proposals or tax proposals for low-income people. One of the first things I did was talk to Bob Greenstein, the head of that organization, and talk to him about whether he thought we could grow models that were like his organization in the States. And this project became the State Fiscal Analysis Initiative.
I haven't the faintest idea what a state budget is.
I actually don't know anything about my state budget. I would imagine that politics come into play a lot when determining where stuff goes.
To be honest with you, I don't know as much as I should know about my state budget.
The fact is that state governments were very powerful in setting the agenda in social policy in the states and financing social policy in the states. So I had this notion that this was going to be, that this was a good idea and a need that we could fill. We got a list together of 29 organizations in 29 states that seemed to have the potential for working in this area. We used a variety of sources to identify such organizations, including the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. An interesting thing about the list of 29 that we assembled was that they came from a variety of sources. Some were child advocacy organizations, some were legal services organizations, some came out of a tax justice network that was moribund except for 2 or 3. One was a university. They came from a variety of places. What we thought was that some would have one strength, some would have another strength, and what we asked the organizations to do is grow toward a common model, but not necessarily start from a common perspective.
I think the Ford Foundation was looking for groups at the state level who were doing the kind of work that the Center on Budget does in Washington. And they called around, and one of the people they called was an African-American policy analyst with the Alabama legislature. And he told them that there was this group called Alabama Arise that was working on tax reform from the perspective of what it would mean for poor people. I think 29 states were invited to send representatives to a meeting in Washington to describe what they did and learn about the program.
We explained what we had in mind and invited them to submit preliminary proposals, and 29 did. One of the interesting early developments in the initiative was hiring 4 consultants to help us understand the experiences and qualifications of the individual grantees, but also to serve as coaches for these groups over the first year of the initiative.
The great thing was that not only did we have the opportunity to put in the grant, they actually assigned somebody to work with us during a planning year to try to come up with an application that was going to be funded.
One of the things we emphasized was bringing other foundations into the project, and I spent considerable time recruiting program officers from other foundations who would be interested in this project. This was to make it clear that this was a broad philanthropic effort and not the inspiration of a single foundation with a political agenda. There were 2 partners that came in to the project to join the Ford Foundation. One was the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which had for a long time invested in child well-being at the state level through its Kids Count project. And the other foundation was the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, that was interested in issues of poverty and had a very keen awareness of the importance of state politics in the interests of their grantees. A 4th national foundation, the Open Society Institute, joined the project in the last couple of years, so we now have 4 national organizations.
Everybody had slightly different agendas going in, but they were able to collaborate around a shared agenda and around the idea that this wasn't our own thing. It was a joint project, and if you're going to reach 20 states, if you're going to reach 30 states, if you're going to be nationwide, you're going to have to be able to be collaborative with other funders. And sometimes foundations have this thing of, if something good is going to happen, we're going to create it, we're going to invent it, we're going to call it our initiative on X. You have to sometimes drop that and say, all right, Michael Lipsky's already invented that thing, and right now it's reaching 16 states. It's got capacity to reach many more states, and so let's go in with that.
We got together the foundations and people at the Center on Budget, and 1 or 2 other people that we brought in as consultants, and evaluated the initial proposals and identified 15 that seemed to be very strong. Using 4 consultants that we had identified for the project, we then visited all of the projects